Let's go through this state machine as a tap access door. So you'd have a student card, a fob, or some sort of radio frequency card that can tap into a door and unlock it. We've got three states here, right? Depicted with the rounded rectangles: the locked state, the unlocked state, and the open state. Let's look starting from the pseudo-state intro into the locked state. We'll assume that this is where we start in the system. On entering this state, we create a log entry and we display a red LED. So these are our entry actions. From here, there are only a couple things that we can possibly do. One is we can detect that the door has been opened with a sensor. So this would be a sensor input here. Two is we can get an authorized or an authenticated tap action from a user there. And three is that we can get a tap action that is for some reason not authenticated there. So this Boolean logic, this either authenticated or not tap action, would of course come from a subsystem of checking that with a server, waiting for that response. But that isn't depicted here, just whether or not it was indeed authenticated or not authenticated. In the case that they're allowed in, the door this transition has an action, which is unlocking the lock. And in the case that they are not authenticated, the door has an action, which in this case is an audible sound. Those are the only ways to get out of the locked state from the door. So let's follow first the regular use case, which is that it's authenticated. So it's authenticated and it's unlocked. We go to the unlocked state. What can we do here? When we first get here, we get a log entry, and we change an LED light to green to depict that it's locked. Now we can't have the door unlocked forever. So the authenticated tap beep does nothing. But the timer starts. And so there's a 10 seconds trigger. And then after that 10-second trigger, the door is going to go back to the locked state. And there's going to be a lock action. Remembering we can't just go from unlocked to locked state without actually performing the action, either as an entry action, an exit action, or an action written in the transition. Okay, so back to the unlocked state, we can go back with the timer to locked. We can have an authenticated tap, which does nothing in the unlocked except for beep. What else can we do? We can open the door and detect that with a door sensor. So that's what the open trigger is referencing, is that the input from a door sensor. Or the user could press the automatic button to open the door automatically. So the trigger here, the automatic button, is a self-transition, because the automatic button would do the action of door motor. Okay, so we assume that this is opening the door with the built-in motor for the door, the automatic door, for a certain amount of time, and then it's just letting go or turning off. And so let's follow that track for a second. So the automatic door button is pushed, the door motor opens the door. So we self-transition into this unlocked state, but we expect that almost instantaneously then the door sensor is triggered because the door is opening, and we go into the open transition. So whether or not we use the door motor or we use a real person to open the door, we get from the unlocked state into the open state by opening the door and detecting that it's open. Briefly, let's suppose the case where the automatic button is pressed and the door motor, for some reason, doesn't successfully open the door. Then we're not really in the open state yet. Say the door is blocked, jammed, or it doesn't work. We stay in the unlocked state, and we stay with those conditions. So this is why it's important here that we're using this open input sensor, this door sensor, to really determine what is the state of the door and what state should we be in. Once we get to the open door state, we'll make a log entry as well, because this is a security system, so we're logging at all points we can here. Then a couple things need to happen. Let's say that the door is open for longer than 10 seconds. So we've got a trigger written here as a timer of 10 seconds. And then the action after that 10-second timer is to sound an alarm. And that's a self-transition back to the open state, because there's nothing here that has specifically changed that state. Next, we have the case that we've got the door in an open state, But that's not really a reason for alarm always, so we need to mitigate that alarm by detecting motion on the inside of the door. And we can assume that if the door is open and someone is moving around on the inside, they need it open for a little bit longer than the 10 seconds. They're holding it open or they're moving something through the door. So motion detected, and that's going to pause the alarm for 10 seconds. Still returning to the open state. This alarm is all about catching the case that the door is unattended and it hasn't fully properly closed. That's why the alarm is set up for the door. Okay, so now what can happen? The door can close, so we detect that it's closed with this closed input, and that's a trigger. And then we'll do the action of locking the door. And then we get to the lock state. There's nothing else here from the open case that we haven't really covered. Otherwise, the authorized tap state, we might want to extend the period that the door is in its unlocked state. So if the door is open and we tap and it's authenticated, then we'll unlock it again, go into the unlock state. And if the door is still open, like the door is never actually closed at that point in time, then we'll head back over through the open detection and back into the open state there, and then we're in the open state again. So that's what happens if the door is open and you tap. You're just essentially extending the time period for the timer, because this would reset the timer because you've just entered this state again. There's no case written here for an unauthenticated tap in the open state. That doesn't have any effect. It doesn't have an effect of immediately locking the door or sounding an alarm. It just doesn't do anything in this model. Okay. So the door closes and it goes back to the lock state. Now, if there are any other cases or things that can happen to the door or from the door, etc., that we've missed, they just aren't described here in the state machine.